Hello, everyone. My name is Kiran Martin. I'm an Indian pediatrician and the founder and director of a non-profit called Asha. Asha was established by me in the year 1988 and works in the slums of Delhi, serving over 700,000 slum residents in the city. For more information on Asha, please go to Asha's website, www.asha-india.org. There is also additional information on me and on Asha in the description box. Today, I would like to share some thoughts on an Asha value, that of nonviolence. Yesterday was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and what a wonderful opportunity to remember this man who changed the course of history in the United States through the power of nonviolence. I entered the very first slum in August of 1988 and began treating the sick in an open space by the side of a large drain. There was a cholera outbreak at the time. The conditions in the slum were absolutely deplorable. I was so shocked. There was no clean drinking water, shallow hand pumps everywhere, and the water was contaminated with sewage. The public toilets, if at all present, were mostly broken. There were dirty, open, small and large drains, solid waste lying everywhere. I saw children looking for bits of metal and plastic in garbage, or shoe shine boys, working as shoe shine boys, just somehow trying to help their parents get some extra money. Just 1 in 10 children were going to school, and most adults were illiterate. Also, 1 in 10 children died before seeing their first birthday. Almost everyone in the slum fell sick often. Very early on in my Asha journey, I soon realized that those living in the slums had so many opponents. There were the self-styled slum lords who were fierce, powerful, and oppressed and exploited slum residents at every opportunity. Many politicians would honestly tell me that slum residents were primarily seen as vote banks. I saw a number of them coming with handkerchiefs over their noses to the slums to ask for votes, just a few weeks before the elections. 90% of slum residents would come out to vote, as opposed to about 50 to 60% of middle income families. You can just about imagine the importance of a slum dweller's vote in a mega city like Delhi that has a population of 18 million, of which about 4 million live in the city's slums. Then, of course, we had the middle income neighborhoods right next to which slums existed. Those people found them to be an eyesore. They felt they made the neighborhood dirty. At the same time, the slum dwellers were employed in their homes as maid servants, as drivers, or newspaper delivery boys, or boys who washed cars, and so on. The very complex and convoluted bureaucracy was mostly apathetic and uninterested, and only responded to instructions given by politicians just prior to elections. I quickly realized that empowering and organizing communities was going to be the only way change could happen. And the women in the community who had no voice, no identity, would need to play an exceedingly important role. I knew this was not going to be easy because of the feudal and patriarchal systems and structures, and the sheer power and ability to exploit that the slum lords possessed. I read a lot about the nonviolence of Mahatma Gandhi, of Dr. Martin Luther King, of Nelson Mandela, and many other lesser known figures. I realized that each person involved in the oppression of slum dwellers had their own history, their own backstory. And then there were the already deeply entrenched systems and structures that came from our history, our culture. It came to me that we did not really have any enemies, but rather they were opponents. I gradually learned how to separate in my mind the doer from the deed. It is the deed we must reject, but not the doer himself or herself. I began making small efforts to employ the weapon of nonviolence, at first through my own interactions with all the players in the story. I was amazed at the success I obtained through my methods. The slumlords opened up to me, told me horrific stories of the lives that they had led, even the crimes that they had committed. I think that they were able to be honest with me because they didn't feel judged in my presence. The slum dwellers hated them with all their hearts, and they knew that very well. They also knew that politicians exploited them for their own personal gain. Beneath that facade of cruelty and muscle power, I could see a desperate longing for love and security. I then began to think of ways in which I could teach nonviolence strategies to the women's groups that I had begun nurturing. I said to them that they would have to organize first. And I explained that we must all abstain from all forms of violence in our interactions. As they organized under my leadership, they began to deal with the slumlords, with their locally elected representatives, with the police, the school authorities, and a host of other stakeholders. From being resigned to their fate, they began to realize that they would have to work really hard to see change. When they began approaching officials, at first they were rebuffed, they were not paid attention to, and were often spoken to really rudely. This naturally began to make them really angry and frustrated. At times they wanted to abuse them, even throw stones at them or hit them. I explained to them that they would only make more enemies by doing that. They would never be able to succeed in their mission of a decent life in their communities. The journey was a long one, and much patience and perseverance would be needed. I said to them that we cannot give in to hate. Only then can we think of creating goodwill, of winning them over through dialogue, through persuasion and reconciliation. We discussed how we must not just abstain from physical violence, but also verbal violence and violence of thought. And this strategy worked. It took a long time, but it worked. Women from Asha communities would organize and visit their elected representatives multiple times. They continue to involve the slum mafia. For example, if a new borewell was installed through the efforts of the women's group, they would invite their representative and their slumlord to inaugurate it. If a new toilet block was constructed, they would give the elected official a place of honor. This way, he did not feel threatened. By and by, over the years, the entire landscape of the slums began to look different. Everywhere there was clean water, newly constructed toilets, drainage systems, parks, street lights, electricity, garbage disposal, beautifully built homes, police outposts, and so much else. There was an atmosphere of so much joy within the organized groups and the wider Asha family. Rich and fruitful relationships developed everywhere. Relationships with slumlords, with the legislators, town councillors, police, the health officials, and so many other stakeholders were strengthened and mutual respect was fostered. Through my many encounters, I have come to understand that violence and exploitation is not final. It is not unchangeable or irreversible. In fact, active peacemaking breaks the cycle of violence and counter-violence. It does not alienate our opponents. It leaves open the possibility of conversion. Our goal is not to defeat our opponents, but to win them over and to try and create love and understanding among all. There is no room for coercion or humiliation or provocation. Also, the better our opponents understand our position and our conduct, the less likely they are to resort to violence. Some may think that non-violence demonstrates weakness and passivity. I think non-violence is active and powerful. It requires a lot of courage and demonstrates dignity and strength. The greatest challenge before us all is to practice non-violence. I can say with all conviction that the lives of thousands of poor slum residents have been transformed through the practice of organized non-violence.